Today we want to look at this little picture of the visit of the wise men. But first of all, I want to think together. I want you to imagine together and to think about if you were never to come to Bible school again, you didn't even make it back to your own ecclesias, if today was your last day and you were to fall asleep today, what legacy would you leave behind? I don't mean legacy in terms of monetary sort of a benefit. I mean in terms of something that you've done which you could pass on to generations. What would you be remembered for? Just have a little think to yourself. Would people recall you and be motivated to continue in a life of service to the truth? Would you be known for your reliability? You know, we've got to do this thing. It's for the benefit of the ecclesia, and after all, Sister so-and-so, she's been doing this for 20 or 30 years, and we owe it to her. Or, you know, we've got to make sure we look after the young people. I remember the last time I spoke to one of my main mentors when I was growing up. He was like a father to me, really, in the truth. And on his deathbed, he said to me, Matt, like, make sure, just look after the young people. And I remember him for that because he looked after me and all the young people in my generation. And I remember him for that. Will you be remembered for that, you know? Like that brother, like we've got to look after the youth group. I mean, look what they did for the youth group for so many years. And what will your legacy be? Will you be known as compassionate, caring, always there for the ecclesia, never missed a meeting, if you know, where humanly possible? We want to look at Daniel's legacy and what he was known for, you know, and obviously it's consistency and his example and all of those things, but just how amazing it was that there are people still 500 years later who are influenced by this man. And we're studying the book 2,500 years later, and still it's relevant to us, and we want to finish there. So this idea of the visit of the wise men, and I thank Brother Nev for half doing my talk the other day. And, you know, maybe you've given out Christmas cards. I don't know what Christmas is like here when I was in this part of the world, but when I was a kid, before I came to the truth, you know, we used to always pass out Christmas cards, and you'd see Mary and Jesus there in the manger. Usually the shepherds are there too, a few animals, the obligatory sheep and Mr. Cow looking over the top. And the wise men, always three of them, as you well know, and as you're going to can see, you know, obviously there must have been three because I got this picture off the internet. So, but like Brother Neville said, there's a multitude of camels that came from the east, probably, in this huge caravan, and three principal leaders, three wise men, perhaps, that were heading that up. But, you know, they're all usually, you know, anachronistically put there together in the manger, and that's not the scene at all. We'll look at that just a little bit later on to show you the verses, so you can at least, if you have to give out Christmas cards, you can scribble out the wrong ones that are not there. I'm kidding, don't give out any Christmas cards. So what expectations did these men have, and what was going on in Israel at the time? Because what we've got is, we've got Babylonians who are ready and waiting and looking for the King of the Jews. And we've got in Israel nobody except a few old people in the temple and maybe a scattered handful of faithful around the whole of the nation. Not even cognizant or aware of the fact that their king is either born or about to be born. It's that time period. They don't even know. And it's extraordinary that there's not festivals and a great moving expectation amongst the people of Israel. They should be there. There should be kids in the street with streamers and fairy floss for sale because it's so exciting. When you go to other countries, anything to do with the monarchy is always met with such enthusiasm, particularly like a birthday of a king, say in Tonga where we went to. They have a feast for days, and you can't buy a pig in the marketplace anywhere for days because it's such a reason and a cause for excitement. amongst the whole nation. Everybody celebrates their monarchy, and if a king or a queen dies, and in a place like Tonga, they have mourning for a whole year. A whole year the nation is depressed and flat. Israel aren't even aware. They're not waiting and they're not ready for the Messiah. Now take that point number one, because we live in the days which we should be expecting our Master. And I know the times are going on and on and on, and your kids say to you, but where is Jesus, Mum? Dad, how come he's not here yet? We get that from our kids. And we don't know. And we've had to, like, when I look at prophecy, when I was younger, I was always dubious about putting dates on things. Always. You know, we date things from 48 and we get to 88 and we're expecting the Lord to return. And then we thought, well, we've blown that out now because it's 98, then 2008 and 2018. That's gone. Maybe it was 67, so we keep dating things from there. Take the dates out of it. Just look around at the last days. We know we live in the last days. And we shouldn't get depressed. And we shouldn't fall into gross darkness like Israel and ignorance from the Scriptures and become unaware of the fact that we're living at the time when the King is about to come back, like Israel were. And so these men, they're waiting for the birth of the Son of God. Do they know it's the Son of God? I don't know. But to them it's the King of the Jews. And when you go to Matthew chapter 2, just have a look at this little section. How do they even know? What was it that gave them the indication? It says, now after Jesus was born, and this is about 2 years after, or within that period of 2 years, 1.5 to 2.5 year period, in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, you'll just notice that, you want to underline Herod the king, behold, the wise men from the east came to Jerusalem saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose up in the east. And the word star, does anybody know what the word star is there in Greek? It's the word aster. What word do you think we get from that? Yeah, like a strewn across the sky. Now, and you think, oh yeah, well of course, like Brother Neville said, like you guys have different constellations up here in the Northern Hemisphere than what we do. And I remember when we flew in to New York and we went around to Washington and Gettysburg and up through to here to meet with you, and we were following stars, but the same stars that we were under in New York, we're under here, and it didn't really pinpoint this place, Angola. And you think, oh well, this is strewn. Well, has anybody ever seen an asteroid before? A shooting star? Who was around that got a glimpse of that terribly underwhelming comet called Halley's? Wasn't that just pathetic? And I thought, I'm glad I won't be here in 76 years to see this thing again. But even if you were, it doesn't pinpoint anything. So what happened was, there was something in the constellations which they noted, which they were expecting, which they were waiting for, which heralded to them on the knowledge that they had that the King of the Jews would be born. Now there's something about the appearance of the star that they say in verse 2 there that's different to the next time the star it presents itself. Difference in the two mentions of the star from verse 2 to verse 9. What's the difference? It's really important too. Well, it arose in the east, which meant when they were over in the east, in the area of Babylon, the star appeared. Something appeared up there, but there's something different about it in... It went before them. It led them. Stars don't lead you. And Brother Neville suggested it could be the Shekinah glory. Well, yes, all angels have the Shekinah glory. I think it's probably an angel, perhaps Gabriel, that led them. But what's important is that their mission is accomplished because of divine guidance, like GPS, straight to the house. You have arrived at your destination. Like, And they were so glad and happy that the star, which they originally saw arise or appear in the east, which left, they knew they had to go to Jerusalem. Where else would you go to meet the King of the Jews? They didn't know the prophecies of Micah, which we're going to have revealed to us, and we'll pretend we didn't know. But it arose again and appeared again and led them. It went before them. It's the same idea as when Israel came out of Egypt, the cloud and the pillar of fire. It went before them and they followed it. How exciting would that have been? So these men are from the east. Now, so there's plenty of things in the east. There's a whole Jewish community in the east. There were, Abraham had sent, his concubine to the east. There's a strong community over there, but you'll notice when they come, they say the King of the Jews, and that's a Gentile title. No Jew ever says the King of the Jews, referring to Messiah. It's always our King. And so they're wise in the king over in the east. Solomon's wisdom in 1 Kings 4 verse 30 is compared to the wisdom of those from the east. They're known for that. Solomon's wisdom was greater than these, and they're known for their riches too. In Job 1 verse 3, Job was greater than the men of the east. But the word here, magi, I think it has its historical kernel back in those guilds that you find amongst the Babylonians. Let's just have a look in Jeremiah chapter 39. And Jeremiah 39 accounts for the time when, at the end of Judah's kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar, because of the rebellion of Zedekiah, goes across to wipe out Jerusalem once and for all and to take the temple apart brick by brick. And it's very significant because it gives us an idea here of what's going on. And I think it pinpoints for us the idea of where these wise men came from. And it's obvious we're doing this talk in relation to Daniel because we think that they are related to Daniel in terms of their historical connection. So in the 9th year of Zedekiah, the king of Judah, in the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army came against Jerusalem and besieged it. And then in verse 3 it says, then all the officials of the king of Babylon came and sat in the middle gate. Nergal-Sarezer, Samgar-Nebu, Sarsekim, the Rabsaris, Nergal-Sarezer, and the Rabmag. Rabsaris, Nergal-Sarezer, the Rabmag, with all the rest of the officers of the king of Babylon. Now, does anybody know what Rab means? It just means, it's the foreign word for chief, okay? So all these people are the chiefs of something. So Rabsaris is the chief of the eunuchs, and then you have there this guy called Nergal-Sarezer, the Rabmag, and that word mag is basically magos, the idea that we have in the New Testament. And whoever he was, Nergal-Sarezer, and some people say that this was Daniel. I don't think it was Daniel. See, there are all these different guilds and little societies in Babylon. So you had the astrologers, and you had a rab over the astrologer. You had the rab astrologer, the head or the chief of the astrologers. And you had the soothsayers, and you had a rab soothsayer. And you had the magi or the magicians, and you had a rab magicians. And you had the Chaldeans, another group, and you had the rab Chaldeans. Now, Daniel wasn't made just the head of the magicians, was he? Daniel chapter 5 tells us that he was made, and I'll just read the words to you so you get what I'm saying. Daniel was made, it says there when the queen mother comes in, your father the king made him chief of the magicians and the enchanters and the Chaldeans and the astrologers. So he was the premier, the principal over all of the wise men of Israel. And these guys here in Matthew obviously are related to all of these ancient and Babylonian groups. And they were astrologers, right? And you know what astrology is? It's It's a group. It's not a scientific discipline by any stretch of the imagination. It's to do with superstition. They do look at the celestial heavens, but they try to predict the riddle of the future just because of the constellations, and they use it to predict somebody's psychology and to work out what's wrong with people. It's not astronomy, which is a widely held and studied scientific discipline. They look at the celestial objects outside and they try and work out, like gods, what's going to happen next. And you might come to, work if you're an enchanter and a magician, and you had a headache that day, and they say, well, any wonder you've got a headache. Have you seen the position of Jupiter today? This is what they would say, things like this. And these are the ones which would be poking around in steaming entrails of sacrificial sheep and looking in the liver to see whether the lobes of the liver were the right coloured tinge of blue. And you imagine if you were part of the army, the soldiers of these, superstitious groups, you're going to go out to war and you're scared stiff. And these are the guys who decide whether or not you're going to go out to war. And they'd look at the flight of the birds. If it went left or right, would decide whether or not they would send 100,000 people to their deaths. Just, yes, the liver's perfect today, let's go to war. And your life was in the hand of these fools. Well, this is those type of people. And Nergal-Sarezer was the go-to man for divining military matters. Now, all of them, these Eastern wise men, are crowded into the book of Daniel. So how did they know? Well, the answer's got to be Daniel, doesn't it? And his legacy is 500 years old. So let's just think about how Daniel could have influenced these people. And we'll take a little bit of poetic license, obviously, and we'll just think about it. So we go back to Daniel chapter 2, and remember where we started at the beginning of the week with Nebuchadnezzar worrying about the future. As he always worried about the future, as a good king. And Daniel comes to him and says, well, Nebuchadnezzar, here's what's going to happen in the future. Your kingdom will give way and it will not last forever. And because of the answer that day when Nebuchadnezzar had his mind read by Daniel through the power of God, and he saw that the dream was certain and that it came true, you'll see that Nebuchadnezzar paid Daniel homage, and in verse 48, the king gave Daniel high honours and many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and the chief prefect over all the wise men, the Rab prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Now think about how things would have changed in the office that day, or in the very immediate future. So Daniel comes in to the offices of all the wise men, and they probably, there's a central big hall, and the soothsayers have that room, and the enchanters have that room, and the astrologers have that room, and the Chaldeans have that room, and they're all there pooling their knowledge. And Daniel walks in, and there's dioramas of the constellations hanging up, and over on this table, those steaming entrails of, the gut of goat, and they're poking at it with a stick, looking at it going, very interesting today. Then over the other side, you might have some, birds hanging up by their little feet with their necks twisted off, and people looking out the windows at the flight of birds. And there's a whole bunch of arrows over here which they drop and see which way they fall. This is the wise men of Babylon. This is how the world works. And it's no different today. It just seems to be a little bit more sophisticated, but it's not. Just watch CNN for half an hour and you get what I mean. And Daniel would have said, let's get rid of all this. What are you talking about? Get rid of the whole lot. And he would have taught them. He would have taught them these things like this. He would have said, listen, I'm in charge now, and you're going to learn a few things. Because wisdom belongs to the God of the Jews. In verse 21 of chapter 2, he changes times and seasons. And he removes kings and sets up kings. And he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. It's he who reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. If you want to find out the riddle of the future, it's through God. And I'm going to explain to you about the vision that your king had. And he would have told them about the stone. And he preached to them the gospel. He told them about Messiah, the good news about salvation through the Jews and the promises made to Abraham, and how that the kingdom would take up the entire earth. And Daniel started to teach these men. And you imagine how resistant you'd be to this. I like my livers. And time went on. And I know it goes much longer into the future, but he evidently had some huge effect on them, because I think it's around, 23 years later, Nebuchadnezzar has the vision of chapter 4. And Nebuchadnezzar's still a little bit, I don't want to just defer to the Jews. So he gives his guys a go. And he tells the wise men of Babylon the vision. And what do they do that's amazing? They say, we don't know what the interpretation is. Formerly in chapter 2, they were liars and they were very corrupt. And they would have made up anything at all. They had the top shelf full of default positional interpretations for any sort of dream. And they would love to take their favourite ones and give it to the king. But they're not like that anymore. Has to be because of the influence of Daniel. The connection with him is the only reason at all. And so they say, we don't know. And we were amazed at it when you get to chapter 5. Everybody's inebriated. And it wouldn't matter what they said at that time. They could have told the biggest lie in the world and people would have believed them. And even though they had the scope, because of the drunkenness, to say another lie, they say, we don't know what the interpretation of many, many tekel upharsin is. We know it's weighed, numbered, weighed and divided, but we can't make sense of that. And their honesty is growing. And they must have been growing in their affection for Daniel as well, because they're led by him. And time passes by, and Daniel would have expected the dream to conclude with the Jews at the end of the 70 years, he knows it's not forever, going back, Messiah appearing in the kingdom, and the Jewish kingdom being settled and filling the whole earth and incorporating the Gentiles. But he gets the vision of, have a look at this, Daniel chapter 7. And he's probably at this late stage in his career, still connected with the wise men. I don't know if he still has his top job at this stage, or Belshazzar, because Belshazzar's so ignorant, he wouldn't even know who's working for him. He's just a drunken fool. But Belshazzar, in this first year of Belshazzar, Daniel has a dream. And in this dream, he's made aware of a time period which he had no idea about. Does anybody know what the time period was?
For Daniel 7?
Yeah, for Daniel 7.
It's the same repeat as Daniel 2 for the time frame. Are you saying when you got the dream, though?
Well, I'm saying in Daniel 2, there's no time frame. We're not told how long it takes. The inference is, well, just as long as the captivity. God's going to speed things up. Messiah will appear. Look at the effect that this had on Daniel. At the end of the matter, in verse 28, Daniel said, my thoughts greatly alarmed me and my colour changed, and I kept them. His anxiety grew, and it scared him so much because he learned, imagine this, he gets back to the officers and they're like, Daniel, what's wrong? You've taken a turn. So, and he doesn't even want to talk about it. He keeps it in his heart. He must have told them. He must have told them that. I had no idea about the time frame. It's going to go on for 1,260 more years. At least. What are you talking about, Daniel? A very long time. But surely that's your kingdom will last. But no, not my kingdom. Our treading down and our persecution and all the lying and the murdering will continue against my people for 1,260 years. Daniel had no idea about that type of time frame. It's all right for us. We go, well, that's Daniel 7. It blew his mind. 2 years later, after he gets over that, he gets the vision of the ram and the he-goat. Imagine understanding this for the first time. So, the ram and the he-goat, the great horn gets broken off, and out of it grows this little horn, the little horn of the goat. Look what it does. And Daniel watches this in the vision, and it says that it, excuse me, I didn't mean to cough into the microphone there. It waxed exceedingly great towards the south and the east, and towards against the glorious land, even to the host of heaven, and it throws down to the ground the host of heaven, tramples on them, and it waxes even great to the prince of the host, and it says it takes away the burnt offering, and his sanctuary was overthrown. Hold on a minute. We're going to go back to our, just dealing with this 1260 years for the last couple of years, we're going to go back to our land, and everything that Nebuchadnezzar did by taking our temple down, and once we go back and restore all things, God says to Daniel, you know how I took apart your temple before and took away the daily sacrifice? I'm going to do it again. On the mountain of Israel, the regular burnt offering and the sanctuary is going to get overthrown because of transgression. Daniel's like, hold on. Gabriel comes to give him the understanding, the interpretation. And when I, Daniel, in verse 15, I'd seen the vision, I sought to understand it. What's going on? And Gabriel came and gave him understanding. And then at the end of the vision, in verse 27, Daniel was so overcome, I think he had a nervous breakdown at the thought that God's going to do to the temple again what he's already done in the past. This is such a culture shock for him and a worldview change. He can't handle it. He lay sick for days. He didn't even get out of bed. He went about the king's business finally, but he was appalled by the vision. He didn't understand. It doesn't mean he didn't understand what was going to happen. He knew precisely what's going to happen, but he didn't know why it was going to happen. What could the Jews possibly do to warrant God doing that to them again? You see the point? And Daniel is so upset about this, and he would have told the wise men, we're going to get to go and restore it through Cyrus. We know that's in Isaiah. Daniel knows those prophecies. We're going to rebuild our temple. God's going to wipe it out again because we've done something so appalling. This is why I believe he prays in chapter 9, because the prayer in chapter 9 is about the sanctuary, about the mountain, it's about God's holy temple. And Daniel thinks, well, surely we're going back soon, 70 years. I know our God's merciful. He includes himself in the prayer, and he prays to God, and he says, you'll forgive us, God. You're merciful. You're not going to hold it against us. I mean, it's a shocking warning what you've given me in this vision, but you won't do it. Surely we can circumvent that. We're a good people now. We've turned back to you. Gabriel interrupts his prayer. While I was speaking and praying in verse 20 of chapter 9 and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel before the Lord my God, before Yahweh my God, for the holy hill of my God, and it was at the time of the evening sacrifice, which is exactly the time period of the vision, Gabriel comes to give him understanding that, Daniel, I've come to make you understand about this vision. It's 490 years, 70 weeks, and at the end of 490 years, at the end of 70 weeks, this is what's going to happen. The transgression is going to get so bad, it says in verse 26, that Messiah will be cut off. Now, there's no textual information about Daniel's reception of those words. How many Jews do you think even understood that Messiah would be crucified? Messiah cut off? What are you talking about? What? What? What do you mean Messiah cut off? Utterly astonishing for a Jew to see that. No, we're going back. Messiah will appear, then the stone will smite the image and become a whole... No, Daniel. Messiah is going to be cut off. And then he who is to come, the prince, will destroy the city and the sanctuary. That's the thing you're praying for, remember? You can't circumvent it, Daniel. God is merciful, but the city and the sanctuary will be utterly destroyed. And the question which must have burned in Daniel's mind is, well, if Messiah is to be cut off, why are we punished for it? Why do you take away our city and our sanctuary and the daily burnt offering because Messiah is cut off? Even posing that question gives the answer, doesn't it? What's the answer to that? That's right. It dawns on Daniel probably like no Jew before and no Jew after. Daniel may be the only one in the Old Testament that understands that his own people are responsible for the cutting off of Messiah. They're the ones that are going to kill him. And so he was so upset to know that God was going to send the little horn of the goat against the sanctuary once more. It was because of transgression, a transgression which was absolutely inconceivable. They're going to kill the Messiah. Wow. Did Daniel tell that to the wise men? I don't know if he did. Because it doesn't look like they understand it. You go back to Matthew, I'm sorry for spending so much time out, but you've got to understand, this is the massive example and influence of Daniel. You go back to Matthew 2, and these men had some understanding, but I don't think Daniel told them this. Messiah, the King of the Jews, is going to be killed. And it's going to be another 490 years. At least he told them about the time period. And so they're ready, and they're a little bit late because the star appeared, and 2 years later they turn up in Jerusalem. So it heralds that he's here. I wonder if they understood this. Look at this. I wonder how much these men believed, because they certainly believed about the kingdom of God to come. But I wonder if they knew this about the Messiah. Look at the emphasis. Verse 11, when they went into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. And then in verse 13 it says, after their visit, an angel said to Joseph in a dream, rise and take the child and his mother. And then in verse 14, he rose and took the child and his mother. And then in verse 20 it says, rise, take the child and his mother. And in verse 21, he rose and took the child and his mother. What do you think we're having emphasised there, brothers and sisters? Where's Dad? Do you think these wise men, do you think they understood that the King of the Jews would literally be the Son of God? That's what's emphasised there in Matthew chapter 2. By all those punctuated verses, the phrase, his mother. His mother. Because out of Egypt have I called my son, in verse 15. So did they believed evidently, but maybe not to that degree. Maybe they didn't understand it. But because of Daniel's influence, they're there. They've got the 490 years. They've been looking for a star. And the star itself, as we said, I think it was yesterday or the day before, yesterday I think it was, it's a little acknowledgement back to Daniel. He was the star in Babylon, the one that glittered through the dark night of the captivity. He's the one through whose righteousness he would turn many to righteousness. And because of that, he will shine like the stars of heaven. And Daniel must have talked to these men about the stars and the constellations and how they represent people in God's kingdom. And so they're looking for the brightest star. They're looking for something at the end of 490 years which would suggest that the king, the star of the Jews, would be born. It's just an amazing concept to think about. But we've got the battle of the kings on our hand, because this man here, Herod, is not a very nice person. He's an Edomite, and though he's absolutely astonished, though he feigns to be considerably interested in these events, he certainly is, but not for the right reasons. He's an absolute psychopath. He had 10 wives. I'm not sure which order those came in, by the way, whether they sent him round the twist, but he's paranoid, absolutely paranoid about his position. He killed one of his own sons and some of his relatives, only because he wanted to maintain his power. And the Jews used to say about him, it's better to be his pig than his son. That's what he was like. And I can't remember, I think it was Edersheim actually I got that from, but it is a genuine footnote, that at the time of his death, when after such a long illness, he commanded that his men, that the chief priests of Jerusalem would be executed so that they wouldn't rejoice at the time of his death. He knew he was hated. He didn't care. Absolute narcissist. But they'd be mourning instead of celebrating over his death. So what was Daniel's secret? What are some of the things that we've seen for Daniel? Well, we've seen that he was a man of prayer. How many prayers did he offer in in Babylon over that 70-year period? At least 75,000 fervent, powerful prayers facing Jerusalem, praying on behalf of his people. And then he offered prayers for his food, and then he offered other prayers. There's no doubt at all. It wasn't all formal occasions of prayer. And we know he was a wise man, and he had an excellent spirit, and he was an excellent example. And remember, he didn't just go back to work and make a stand about something. He went quietly about his work, and he became known as a consistent person that could be relied on. That was what Daniel was. And he obviously read his Bible too, and he sought to understand. Like Daniel chapter 9 tells us, he sought scrolls, he looked at them, and he tried to understand more about his father and about the time periods in which he lived. He was an incredible example. And we all want that for our children. We all want them to be on like 8 or 9 out of 10 for zeal for the truth. All of us want them to take up the mantle. Well, what if we're on, and we want that, but what number are we on? Are we on 3, 2 or 3? Like, Mum, Dad, are we going to the Bible class tonight? Oh, yeah. Probably Mum will stay home, or we'll work it out. And you sit in the lounge and gets on a bit. Are we going to Bible class? Oh, we're all a bit tired, It's a big day tomorrow. How do you expect the kids to be on 8 or 9 if we haven't got the energy? And getting the energy takes a little bit of awareness of your own failings and your own weakness. If you're going to stay up late binging on TV and stay up and go out all the time and not do things of the truth, well, obviously not going to have the space that you need to be with the community of believers. And the kids are going to see that. They start off, they're on 8 or 9, but when they reach teenage and they grow in independence, do they just, settle back into this mediocrity that a person who's on 2 or 3 out of 10 offers to them? We want this for our next generation. We've got to get back to the basics, and we've got to get excited about the truth again. These weeks are good for that. Now, here's the chronology of the time. I did it again. So Christ is born in Luke chapter 2, and at that time, the shepherds, because the angelic choir there that appeared to them and showed them where the manger was, in Bethlehem, visit the newborn baby. Christ is then subsequently circumcised around 8 days later, probably in the Bethlehem area. 40 days later, he's presented at the temple where Simeon picks him up and is so excited now he can die because he's seen the Lord's anointed. That's 40 days later. And maybe they settled down and reside in the area of Bethlehem or around Hebron in Elizabeth's house. But up to 2 years old, around that time period, the wise men come to visit. And he's not a baby, he's a little child. It's not a manger, but they're in the house, probably in that Bethlehem area still. And it's afterwards they flee into Egypt and the babies are killed, and then he takes up residence when they come back after God calls him out of Egypt into Nazareth. So Herod the king, he says to, he puts the wise men out for a little while, and he talks to his chief priests and scribes, and can you imagine how mad he is? Why didn't you guys tell me about this king of the Jews? Where's he going to be born? They go, well, it's Micah 5. He's going to be born in Bethlehem, but we didn't know. We're not aware. And he's so mad, he tells the wise man, look, go look for him. He's in Bethlehem, but when you find him, come again. Tell me about it, because I also want to worship him. Herod the king, there's no way. And so the men leave, and they're unaware. They think, oh, well, this is exciting. We've brought news. We've brought good news to Israel, and they're going to get behind us now. But on their way, there's an angel that warns them not to go back. Well, when they leave, rather, they're warned not to go back, but to get out as quick as possible to their own country. But the star appears and guides them to the house, and they finally get there. And look what it says. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And so they're so happy, they're probably dancing, and they've got, with the rest of their caravan, music playing, and there's a knock on the door. And Joseph answers that night. And imagine they come in, and the little toddler, the Lord Jesus Christ, is there. Mary's like, who is it, dear? And Joseph, like, I don't know. In they come, dressed in those weird outfits that Brother Neville had on the other night. Evidently straight from the Bible readings. And they, what? What are you doing here? And we're from, we know that you're not from around here, but from the Babylonian area. And they tell the story about this great angel Gabriel. And they know about Daniel. And they inform Mary, and Mary says, what, the 70 weeks prophecy you're talking about? Well, you know how that was 500 years ago, almost. That same angel appeared to me. And this child here is because of the word of God that angel Gabriel told me about. And then they fall out, they open the gifts up, the gold, the frankincense and myrrh, expensive gifts, and they offer that to the child, and they bow down and worship this child. And we looked at it yesterday, the bowing down and the worshipping. It's not just a simple sign of respect. This is absolute adoration and worship. What would provoke them, Gentiles, to worship the King of the Jews if it weren't because they believed in the interpretation of the stone of Daniel chapter 2? And if they didn't accept it, they wouldn't do that. They must have accepted that this King of the Jews wasn't just King of the Jews, but he's going to be King of the world, including the Gentiles. And you have these sorts of quotes, because this here of Gentiles worshipping the Son of God is a little microcosm. And we just need to flick through just a couple of verses. What's that? Is that say 11:14? Is that clock wrong again? What is wrong with that clock? Isaiah chapter 60, just really quickly, brothers and sisters. Isaiah 60. Look at this. Arise, shine, for your light has come. And talks about the darkness on the people of Israel. Thick darkness. But glory will be seen on you. And look, verse 3. Nations shall come to your light. That's what's happening now. And kings to the brightness of your rising. End of verse 5. Well, verse 5. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and exult. And they were exceedingly joyful in Matthew 2, because the abundance of the sea, or the nation, shall be turned to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels, probably a huge caravan that came with these, perhaps 3 men. From Sheba, it says in verse 6, they shall bring gold and frankincense. This is a picture of the kingdom, when people shall bring the wealth of the nations to Christ. In verse 14, the sons of those who afflicted you, the Gentiles, shall come bending low to you, and all who despise you shall bow down at your feet. Babylonians did that. They afflicted them, and now Babylonians are bowing down to the Lord Jesus Christ. Is Isaiah 60 a prophecy of Matthew chapter 2? Is this glorious, huge prophecy of Isaiah 60 really about Matthew chapter 2? No, it's not. Isaiah 60 is a prophecy of Christ in the kingdom when the Gentiles shall come in. It's Revelation 21. When all the wealth of the nations shall rejoice as they give of their abundance to the King of the Jews. But Matthew 2 is a wonderful little cameo of it. And also in Psalm 72, these ideas are expressed there. Psalm 72, just really quickly. Verse 10. Where the kings of Tarshish and the coastlands will render tribute to him. The kings of Sheba shall bring many gifts. May all kings fall down before him. All nations shall serve him. Verse 15, they'll bring gold And they'll offer prayer, frankincense and myrrh, and all people will be blessed in him. These prophecies are of Christ and the kingdom. And those Babylonians, I'll just say three for the sake of a number, those three men bowing down to that small child Jesus are happy to offer up all their gifts and all their wealth of the Gentiles to the King of the Jews, because they understand Daniel 2. They believe it. It's a Jewish hope. And all that come in will be part of the Israelite kingdom. Of that, there's no doubt. So we need to finish. I get that. This is the end of Daniel for you, brothers and sisters. What can we take home? We can take home these things. Daniel is no longer just a book about prophecy. Okay? It is that. But Daniel is a story of a man who is so much like the Lord Jesus Christ. He's more like the Lord Jesus Christ than he is like himself. And he went through many experiences which are obviously transferable to our lives and applicable. We don't face lions. None of us are going to get thrown to a lion's den. But we are going to face people who hate us so much and want to devour our lives, take us away from the faith. We're never going to be thrown to a furnace, but the trials of those people who hate us, that red-hot fierceness of their anger, how dare we have a difference of opinion to them? We don't even live in a world anymore where you can just hold an idea in your mind without accepting it and go, oh, that's their opinion. They hate you for it. They preach tolerance, and they're the most intolerant group you'll ever meet. We're not forced to drink wine. No one's going to say, here, drink the wine. Have the wine. It doesn't happen. But sin is out there wanting to unhinge us, pull the blinds down over our moral faculties so we can't reason properly. If you drink from Babylon's cup and you fall into sin and you are seduced by the immorality of this world, you will not be in the kingdom. You will not be able to drink the wine of Christ. But we've got to avoid that. And we're not real vessels. We don't have cups and saucers and things in our house which are literally from the temple of Jerusalem. God's not interested in those vessels. It's us. And we've got to make sure we fill ourselves with the good wine of the Spirit of Christ. And of course we don't fight beasts. None of these things. They're the liars and the murderers extent in the realm of sin. And so what can we learn about Daniel? Well, he was our saviour in Babylon. He was the righteous man to whom everybody looked to. And you know I don't mean perfect, but he was the one who represented the Lord Jesus Christ. He was high and lifted up, and he was a model of salvation to all of Israel. And we look back on him and his life and we think about his consistency, and we say we're going to take that home. We think about his excellent spirit, and we're going to take that home with us as well. We think about how honest he was. We're going to take that home. And we think about how humble he was, and we'll take that home, and how not self-righteous in any way, shape or form he was. We will take those things home and make Daniel a good basis for living our life. And if we learn to lean on Daniel and to model our life after him, what we'll find is the beautiful thing is that we've actually modelled our life on the life of Christ.